You're late today, Neil.
Yeah, right. Look who's talking.
Yeah.
Sorry for the hold up there, folks. Here we are now. Better late than never, as somebody in the chat room says. Thank you very much.
What did they say? Better late than never.
Better late than never.
That was me.
Oh,
Thanks, Scotty.
thanks, Scotty. You're a number one fan.
So, 12 Monkeys.
Huh?
12 Monkeys was not just a movie.
Hmm.
It was predictive programming. Here we are. And it's actually happening. A monkey pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
As you can see, I've not actually looked too deeply into this monkeypox thing because I'm obviously confusing monkeypox, the name, for something totally different. But yeah, it's been in the news all week. Monkeypox.
All of a sudden, out of the blue, out of nowhere, boom, just happened. Springs upon the stage.
You know the drill. Lockdowns.
No, but like, how far do you push the public skepticism? Or, well, not push it, but test it. It's an interesting test of public skepticism, you know, really. Because, I mean, as far as, I'm sure, as far as every single person, average person on this planet, who's aware of monkeypox, it just literally came out of nowhere within the last week.
True.
It just, boom, and all the media is talking about it. Hot on the heels of COVID, right? Everything with COVID goes away, pretty much for most places except Shanghai and other places in China. But
If that's COVID.
if that's what it is, but in the rest of the, for the vast majority of the world, the COVID thing is just disappearing. And monkeypox.
Have you seen the memes where he's got the NPC and they're swapping out the chip, the Ukraine chip, and putting in...
Right, yeah.
Okay, and then the other one where the guy's like, I've just got all my Ukraine decorations up.
Right.
Are you...
Right,
Oh,
yeah.
no.
Really? Monkeypox?
Well, hang on a sec. Before we dismiss this out of hand, though, the president of the free world,
Who?
Joseph R. Biden,
Mm.
says, quote, everybody should be concerned. What's your response to that, Joe?
Everybody should be concerned.
About monkeypox?
I'll tell you my reading of the situation. And I follow that 100%. Scotty, put up monkey.jpg. This
I've
is
got some of those
all
too.
I need to know. This is the beginning, the middle, and the end. Read that out there.
Okay, Daily Mirror headline, Russia looked into using monkeypox as biological weapon, claims ex-Soviet scientists. I saw that somewhere else. It's just being spread around.
There you go. That's your answer.
Russia did it. Putin did it.
Everything. He did everything. You don't understand the extent of what he did. He did everything. Not just in the past, and not just now, but in the future. He did everything. That's how cunning, but also
Powerful.
deranged and sick and bad at wars he is. He's able to do stuff now.
Time travel.
Yeah, more or less.
That's why I'm thinking 12 monkeys.
do stuff now
We
in the
need
future.
Bruce Willis to go back in time and do something to fix Putin's messing with the,
Timeline.
timeline, yeah.
Yeah. He's a time traveler.
Mind you, there's a clip as well going around. Bill Gates late last year warning about a smallpox bioterror attacks.
Right.
He
Yeah.
didn't mention Putin.
No.
Obviously, that's linked in the current story doing the rounds. But what's the relation? Smallpox and monkeypox. Well, it kind of is because the U.S. government announced it's buying up stocks of smallpox vaccines, which haven't been used in the U.S. or the West since the 1950s. And what old stocks or modern stocks, but the old basic ingredients of smallpox
Yeah, I've
would
got
work against. Explain. Do you know?
got a
about-
big long. I've got like 6 pages on. You want me to read them all?
You're going to
Got
read a
6 pages.
Wikipedia entry on monkeypox.
No, it's not. It's not Wikipedia. No, it's much more informed for us than that. But I'll just give you the breakdown details, just so you don't have to. Although of course, people watching this will of course and can of course look it up themselves. Monkeypox was first identified in 1958 in colonies of,
Monkeys.
and the first human case of the virus was identified in 1970 in the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. A result of people living in Africa having been in contact with monkeys and other monkeypox animal host for millennia. So it's been around for, quite a long time, millennia. Symptoms of monkeypox are similar to, but much milder than smallpox. General clinical presentation of the disease caused by the West African monkeypox clade virus involves influenza-like symptoms, fever, body aches, chills, and together with swollen lymph nodes. So basically,
Nice. Boobos.
no.
No.
Well,
lesions.
a rash on the palm of the hand is often observed. There's no
can
evidence
I
of,
add to
no
that?
evidence of asymptomatic transmission, by the way.
Yeah, you have it or you
contrary to,
don't.
yes, contrary to COVID, which obviously
Well,
there was a
didn't they
visible,
retract
COVID.
that?
Huh?
Didn't they retract that?
No.
No.
That was everything. Was COVID did everything? Like, I mean, COVID did all the things that no other virus has ever done in the history of the universe. You know, at certain points during the bullshit.
Yeah. Can't question the COVID.
So, no evidence of asymptomatic transmission. In other words, current medical knowledge indicates that it is only spread by person-to-person contact between an uninfected individual and someone who already had symptoms of the disease. Basic other stuff.
I'm reading from nature.com here. They write most people recover from monkeypox in a few weeks without treatment.
Right, exactly. It's double-stranded DNA virus, which means that due to the double-stranded nature of the DNA, each of the two strands are as a check. Well, that's kind of too complicated.
Well, it means it's stable. It's not a fast mutating virus.
Not at all. It's very slow mutating. It's very slowly has very slow RO
spread.
i.e. spread. It's not very infectious in humans. And
so why the hoopla?
You know why the hoopla, right?
Well, let's try and take it at face value.
Here's coming from the CDC, actually.
Okay.
This is what StatNews, a website called StatNews, journalist Helen Brantwell recently interviewed CDC experts and published a summary of the clinical presentation, 2 paragraphs. With 1 to 3 days of the onset of a fever, a distinctive rash appears, often starting on the face. Many conditions can cause rashes, but the monkeypox rash has some unusual features, notably the fact that vesicles can form in the palms of the hands. So check your hands for vesicles. In countries where it is endemic, the virus is believed to mainly spread to people from infected animals when people kill or prepare bushmeat for consumption. So this is going to be not the China virus, but the Africa virus. Once the virus jumps to people, human-to-human transmission can occur via respiratory droplets or by contact with monkeypox lesions or bodily fluids. With the virus entering through small cuts in the skin, it can also be transmitted by contact with clothing or linens. Basically, do you know, what's the word? Varicella.
Chickenpox.
Yes.
It's basically chickenpox.
Yes.
And in fact, most often you don't actually get to the point of developing symptoms on your skin.
Right.
It's more like flu-like symptoms, like other viruses.
Yeah.
So, okay, so what are they hanging this on? What did change, if anything? Well, Nature writes more than 120 confirmed or suspected cases were detected outside of Africa in the last week.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, 120. Okay, so what?
14 countries.
Because that's interesting because this number of cases detected in the last week alone has already surpassed the number detected outside the continent of Africa since 1970.
Mm-hmm.
So,
which means it was made in a lab.
Ah, Jesus. Well, interesting. It was first detected in monkeys in a lab in 1958, and there was monkeying around going on with monkeys and viruses in the labs even far back then. But okay, so why at the end of this Nature article, why even be concerned at all? They say, well, they let on that it's a cousin of smallpox,
right?
Considered eradicated since 1970s, right? What they're worried about is the fact that it's being detected now, and they don't know why. That's all. Mm-hmm. In the end, it's what SARS-CoV-2 would have been without a shitload of money and power behind it as well for other reasons, ulterior motives. It would have been an interesting epidemiological development, and it should have stayed that way. Instead, all those guys got, like you've described, pushed up in front of the cameras day after day, scaring the shit out of people about it. Anyway, so there's something interesting going on. For sure.
Well, what's interesting is that we have just come out of a 2-year quote-unquote pandemic, and viruses are on everybody's minds, or supposedly. You're not allowed to forget about the virus. You're not allowed to forget about the COVID pandemic, right? So obviously anything like this that comes along is going to be clickbait, used as clickbait by the media, right? This kind of thing has happened with other viruses and other diseases or whatever over forever, basically, and it appears in the news. They say that a few cases are found here, there, and everywhere, and then it goes away again. Yeah, right. So that's about the height of it, unless, like I said, someone's been tinkering with monkeypox in a monkey lab, monkeying around with the monkeypox in a monkey lab, like they almost certainly were doing with COVID. And that's, you're allowed to say that now. It's such a breath of fresh air to be able to say that after 2 years of censorship by social media for wrongthink, when it's actually okay now to say what was blindingly obvious and was known in official circles from the get-go. As soon as someone looked in China, and then afterwards in other European countries, other Western countries, looked at the SARS-CoV-2 under a microscope and said, yep, that was made in a lab.
I have a map here of world countries where this monkeypox has been detected the last week. Scotty? It'll blow your mind. It's amazing. It's astonishing. When they say non-African countries, what they really mean is a very select part of the world, otherwise known as all the countries that have sanctioned Russia. It's the West.
But that's because all those other countries don't have microscopes
Yeah.
or don't have
They don't
a
have
medical system. Isn't that true?
They don't have they don't have, let's say, the same coherent agenda.
Seems to be an agenda with that for sure. Yeah, the talking about monkeypox and it appearing in basically Canada, the US, and in the international community, even Australia. Look at that. It went from you can see how it would spread from Europe to the US and that kind of stuff, supposedly, or be detected there because of travel. But anybody going to Australia doesn't stop ever. There's really no contact. There's no stop-off point between Europe and America, North America and Australia. See that?
Yeah.
So that's how it got to Australia, because people just like hold their nose and fly over that rest of the world, the not international community, and they can spread it to Australia.
Yeah.
Isn't that weird?
Instantly within a week.
Yeah. Surely it should be some in the Middle East at least, because at the very least, because
You make flyovers.
Well, Dubai is definitely a stop off for flights going from Europe to Australia, so it definitely should be the Middle East, but apparently not.
The
So, yeah.
WHO has convened an emergency meeting.
Yeah, well then.
The US government announces it's bought millions of smallpox vaccines. Again, like I said,
Yeah.
okay, whatever. Belgium has announced a 21-day quarantine period for anyone who's tested positive. Interesting in their
So
report
they
about
know what
that.
to do now.
Yeah, it's just follow the
Quarantine.
program, plug it in.
COVID.
Did you note that they've ID'd possibly the spreader events of where monkeypox is coming from,
Yeah.
at least in some countries?
The gays.
The gays in Spain and in Belgium, actually.
Yeah.
And a fetish parade.
A fetish parade.
That's one thing I read, yeah.
A fetish
kind-
parade, a gay sauna in Spain.
Yeah. So that kind of monkeying around.
The one in
That was a super spreader event in that. What's it called? Providence, up in is it Rhode Island or some one of those northeastern states in the US? Remember during COVID, where they had like a
Yeah.
massive outbreak, and they failed to mention in the media reports on this massive outbreak that it was the annual gay bash in this small town where something like 40,000 gay people all hang out and
That was kind of-
monkey around, and they didn't mention that in any media reports.
Well, at
In fact, that was one of the events where everybody that was used to bring back or to attempt to impose a federal mask mandate across the entire U.S. And it was discovered, it was discovered pretty much immediately that you were citing this mass outbreak among tens of thousands of people in this small town, and everybody needs to wear masks, and they forgot to mention that, yeah, those people in that town in Providence, the homosexual community, they were probably wearing masks already, but not the medical ones. So they did. Seriously though, you should see. So Vice did a show on it, on that. It's been going on for decades, and it's just you talk about Sodom and Gomorrah. You talk about licentiousness. It's pretty rough.
Well, that's an interesting thing about the monkeypox spread is it seems to be person to person. So
bodily fluids. Well,
it's
I
essentially
mentioned bodily
behaving
fluids.
or transmitted like an STD.
Yes, it's the new AIDS.
Well, is it? No, obviously not. There are obviously many things that are STDs or transmitted. They don't even show up as STDs. They're not detected.
Right.
They're not checked for. When if you go to get an STD test, there's only a certain battery of things they're going to just rule out for your peace of mind or whatever. That's not going to be on the list. It might be now if you specifically ask for it because they've noticed it and they're starting to notice the pattern.
Yeah.
But something that's going to be, infecting and killing millions of people, this isn't it. But it's like you said, the inertia of what we just went through before carries over. So anything that comes up gets the same kind of aura in the media as if this could be the killer event.
Yeah.
When,
Clickbait.
read the first sentence or even the headline properly and you're like, okay.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. But that's the same with any topic almost in the mainstream media, any major topic that people are being subtly encouraged to, or having subtly shoved down their throat. They, need to read beyond the headline at the very least, because very often the headline is massively misrepresentative of the content of the actual story or the content of the news item or what they're actually reporting on. The headlines in Western media do not, and have not for a very long time, for the most part, represent, on contentious issues, on major issues, do not represent what's actually being talked about.
I think this next headline is accurate, though.
Yeah.
Scotty. They better watch out, British MPs.
Westminster. It's just
Seriously, that don't. If you're in
better
London,
read-
just
you better read that out.
avoid that building with the.
Don't you have to read that? That's,
Okay, this is
know.
British again. I think it's the Mirror last week or the Sun. Rape drug claims. MP quote spiked with rape drug and woke to find his nipples being licked by fellow Tory quote who also abused Labour MP and two more.
It's just. I mean,
If you see that tower and you're in London, don't go near it.
It
There could be a super spreader monkeypox event right there.
No doubt, yeah. It just brings to mind the wonderful, the venerable history of Westminster and British democracy, and everything that's noble and historic and sober and respectable about the British,
Yeah.
establishment and the
Yeah.
institution that is,
And
Parliament,
and
British Parliament.
the market has left on the world.
Somebody should send that to Jordan Peterson.
I was just thinking the same thing.
Are these people like?
What's more, he was carrying this shit out in the Houses of Parliament.
Well, it's just a bad apple,
But weren't
They get-
these? This is like the same government who there was the whole COVID thing and Boris Johnson and
Partying up,
they were having parties during COVID lockdowns and
Yeah.
getting drunk and
having super spreader.
do they actually govern at all or did they just like?
Not really, no.
Is it like a frat house or something?
It's barmy.
Like
It's
Her
barmy.
Majesty's frat house
There's
or like
there's
what?
reports in the last year of like they did spot checks for cocaine just on the banisters of
Yeah.
the halls of the venerable Houses of Parliament, and there's cocaine everywhere. Like they find it on the stairs down and the toilets. It's just they're coked up, lubed up.
Yeah, it's a general degradation of morality. When people like that, in politicians in the West in particular, have long since abdicated or, stopped taking responsibility in the supposed way they're meant to towards the population, which is a kind of fatherly or parental-like role towards the population, and to actually, be genuinely
With any kind
positively
of
motivated.
degree of conscientiousness.
Yeah, and
as
that
opposed
conscientiousness
to
would reinforce
self-interest.
Yeah, and would reinforce that kind of attitude and that, implementing, working for the people in that way as they claim they do, would reinforce their own kind of moral compass or their morality, let's say. But when they stop doing that and are completely self-interest, as they have been for a long time,
Anything goes.
well, then it just degrades into that kind of thing. You get that kind of thing coming to the surface,
Scotty, you mentioned Partygate in the UK. That's the infamous thing where over 24 incidents where Boris Johnson and colleagues were getting pissed on lockdown, during lockdown.
Yeah.
Even on days when they announced harsher measures,
for
they
the
were all
population. Yeah.
living
Well, that's
it
an
up.
example of what I'm talking about,
Yeah. The Partygate is what is called a scandal in the UK, and there's an ongoing investigation by Sue Gray, a civil servant, and her reports being released in drips and drabs, and the BBC is doing specials on what it's expected to show, and it's going to show that, well, 12 of the 16 we investigated were definitely questionable, and we're going to recommend that, these regulations are put in place, and blah, 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 blah. I just want to say, as a side note, like, it's going nowhere. It should have ended up in people being fired at the very least, if not thrown in prison, something close to that, for extreme criminal negligence in terms of abusing the shit out of people while living it up. It's not even going to result in it. The British it's amazing that they cannot rule, but they are sublime. British parliamentarians, sublime at deflecting anything that comes their way.
Yeah.
It's just amazing me.
Well,
year after
they have
year.
to.
They have to. I mean, it was a dozen years ago, maybe 10 years. I think it was 2012 with the whole pedophile scandals, where you had Jimmy Savile, the entertainer from the BBC, which exposed that there were many other high-profile celebrities at BBC studios, ITV studios, British radio, and so on. While all that was going on with kids in those venerable institutions, what also emerged in the course of it was that Savile was fiddling with kids not in the British, not in the House of Commons, but in other buildings and facilities,
associated with it. Yeah.
country clubs or whatever in the city.
Well,
And
that's
that
just-
MPs were involved.
That's just the tip of the iceberg. Like,
I bring it up because it was 10 years ago. It was 2012 when Theresa May, then Home Secretary, was trying to fight off.
covering up.
Oh, Jesus. I was thinking that this is it. Like, this is going to blow back the veil. This is going to cause a revolution in the UK. But they deflected it. And all she had to do basically was go, look, you know what? We have a cultural problem in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
That was it. They put out a bunch of reports about how it's just become a cultural thing.
Right.
That adults in our country fiddle with kids, and let's move on. And they did just move on.
Mm-hmm.
And the country's still there. People still vote in elections. They
All
still,
those people, yeah.
nothing
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah, it's well, they resort in all those situations where there's a kind of a scandal in government. No matter where it is, but particularly in the West, there seems to be, every country, there's governments are embroiled in scandals, whether they're overt or covert, or known or unknown. But the rationale for always covering it up, unless it's something that's like small potatoes, but the rationale for covering up anything big like that would be that you'll undermine public faith in the institutions of democracy in the country. It could just all fall apart. So, but that allows you to do anything basically.
It
But
means the
anything
next
can
scandal's
happen.
worse.
Anything can happen. It's carte blanche to do whatever you want, knowing that no matter what you do, you get to stay in power basically.
And they go on and on about checks and balances, about how we have them, and all the rest of those barbarians out there on the planet, they don't have them, but we have them. Checks and balances. What do you have? You got nothing.
They're cover-ups.
In fact, you're egged on into extreme immoral degradation of yourselves and then everyone else. Checks and balances, my arse,
Yeah. Yeah, they're a bunch of liars, hypocrites at the very least. Most of them, let's say. And to different degrees. There's some particularly depraved individuals, particularly corrupt individuals, but they tend to rise because of their corruption and their depravity type thing. They tend to rise to the top because they have most to cover up, and they are willing to do whatever it takes to get to the top, and then they intimidate and cow others who aren't like as bad as them or aren't bad at all in a certain sense. They can't do anything about it because say one word and you're gone. Say one word and your name will be mud.
And then select others of like mind
To move in,
which is negative selection. That super concept that Lobachevsky wrote about in how things degrade in a downward motion.
Yeah.
Negative selection simply is, from an objective point of view, you think the best in his field or her field gets to the top, so to speak. That's what you hope for. It's the best in terms of meritocracy. Objectively, they're the person for that job. And then they're going to recruit others capable to help them shoulder the burden
That's
of
positive
reaching
selection.
targets. Positive. But when you get the reverse and negative selection happens, holy crap. You've got someone who cheated their way to that position. And then they're going to be
And they're
looking
still
for
cheating.
allies to help cover up their ongoing corruption and greed.
Others like them.
And it proliferates negative
That's it.
selection on down and out across
It's a whittle.
until it infects everything.
Yeah, it's a whittling away of any kind of morality or any kind of standards or
Competency.
and also competency.
Never
It's
even
worse. Yeah.
Even if people have long since
it's not even
accepted that they hold their nose
Yeah.
at scandals that come up, so long as look things are functioning, the trains run, I can eat, I get paid. Competency, I'll accept.
Well,
all kinds of stuff.
It's different. It's yeah. For me, it's like different to competency in a situation because it's more like, it's that they don't care. It's a certain decency and altruism and desire to be a quote unquote public servant and to work for the good of the people. When you don't care about any of that, it's not about that you're being incompetent. It's just you don't care. You don't do what you should do because you don't care because it doesn't serve your own personal interests. And it can look like incompetency where you just fucked that up completely. You didn't provide any of those services. It's like, yeah, I could have, but I didn't want to. I didn't feel like it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily, because when you do the competency thing, you posit that these are a bunch of idiots, complete idiots. But idiots would be exposed. So they're very competent people. They're just very competent at being corrupt and conniving and manipulating and threatening to other people.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, that's monkeypox for you.
monkeypox.
We'll have to
Maybe
see
we'll
where it
return
goes.
to it. Maybe it's a flash in the pan. Maybe it's just
Yeah, it's hard to know.
this week's current thing. You want to move on?
Yeah.
Azovstal.
We'll talk about, what about Azovstal?
Well,
Nobody surrendered in Azovstal, Neil.
last week,
Shut up. Nobody surrendered. I want to hear it. No one surrendered. They were. Look, I'll tell you what happened in Azovstal. All those guys, and they're not Nazis either, right? None of them are neo-Nazis. Those tattoos of Hitler and the swastika on their arms and stuff. I think Russians did that to them.
probably painted them on.
Painted them on, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, those guys in Azovstal were, as it turns out, didn't really know this beforehand, but as it turns out, it was just a symbolic stand they were taking, right? Just to bolster morale amongst the other Ukrainian military and the Ukrainian population and the Western populations as well. And it was symbolic, and they decided that, okay, the job had been done, it served their purpose, and now they were going to leave. And it was Zelensky and his people who evacuated them and took them all back to Kiev for tea and
Crumpets.
sunflower seeds. Sunflower oil.
Did Zelensky claimed it's an evacuation, and he claimed
Evacuation
that
and
our
that they-
people, intelligence and military officers, are coordinating
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Did he actually also claim that they're coming back to Kiev? No.
No.
He made that
But
up.
it was
okay.
implied in a
It
way.
was implied, yeah. Yeah, we've all got it under
Yeah.
control.
Except the
did
reality-
Did he imply that, correct me, but what was the situation? Did he imply that it was he gave the green light to them
Yes.
to surrender?
Yes.
Did he have that authority over them? I
No.
thought they were renegade.
No, it was the Pentagon.
It was the Pentagon. But so
As
it
in
holds,
everything
but it
else.
wasn't Zelensky's permission to give. But
No.
they did get permission to
But
surrender.
nobody in Ukraine has any permission to do anything about this war unless they get a say-so from the State Department or the Pentagon or the American bigwigs. This is America's war.
Right.
It's got nothing to do with Ukraine per se. It's not, in that sense, it's not Ukraine versus Russia. It's America versus Russia using Ukraine and
Right.
using the worst types of people, again, negative selection of people in Ukraine to facilitate that their rabid, hatred of Russia. It's not even a hate. I don't even know if it's a hatred of Russia. It's just, again,
It's not personal to Americans,
Well,
to
it's not-
the American elite.
well, even to the Ukrainians, the people they selected in Ukraine, basically.
Well, you've got some
they're just-
ideological nutters.
Yeah, amongst the
who
rank and
want to
file,
slaughter
but the
all the
people above it,
Muscovites, as they
yeah,
put it.
right. They did say that, but that's the rank and file type thing. But in general, the ones making the decisions supposedly, they're selected and instructed by the Pentagon because this would not be happening without America doing what it's doing and with their partners in Europe. It simply wouldn't be happening. It would be long done and dusted at this point if Ukraine was left to its own devices.
Yeah.
And of course, Ukraine.
Zelensky has tried to sue for peace
Yeah.
numerous times and was told.
Sort of. Well, the Russians claim that there's no talking.
Yes.
There's no one talking in Ukraine. There's no one interested in any kind of a talking in Ukraine. And that's because America isn't interested in talking because America wants to prolong the war as long as possible. And Ukraine can just shut the hell up. If anybody thinks differently in Ukraine, and Zelensky included, he can just shut the hell up and do what he's told, or they'll be in deep shit. obviously. So they put themselves. America has put them in a bind. They've put themselves in a bind long before now, because I mean, there's it's generally accepted and known, and there's the Russians claim to have documents that they found as part of their operation that there was a plan. Of course, there's evidence on the ground for this as well. There was a plan to launch a war on Donbass by Ukrainian military was going to launch a war, the third war technically in the past 10 years on Donbass, a kind of decisive war in February this year, 1 month before the Russians. In March this year, 1 month after the Russians decided to go in. So the Russians went in 1 month before, and they obviously knew that themselves because the timing of it is too coincidental. The Russians obviously knew that there was a plan, and it's not just about documents; it's about seeing a build-up of troops, which it's relevant to what's happening right now in Donbass area, seeing the build-up of troops on the border with the conflict line or the of the separatists and Ukraine proper in Donbass. They were planning to go in and wage a kind of blitzkrieg on Donbass and slaughter loads of people, and Russia just went, nah, you're not going to do that. People forget about that. It's sad that people don't know that this is effectively just a continuation of a war that's been going on for 10 years. It's weird that because that's an important part of your understanding of any conflict, is that did this just start now all of a sudden, or has it been going on for 10 years? If you don't know it's been going on for 10 years.
Well, 10 years, you're talking about a 10-year time span. Look at the week time span. Last weekend, Europeans, mainly who watch Eurovision, right? Not Americans so much, win Eurovision. We played the clip of their winning entrant at the end of a performance going, "Heroes of Azovstal, send money, send weapons to Heroes of Azovstal, big stand, everybody claps, it's brilliant." 24 hours later, they begin surrendering. 36 hours later, 2,500 of them have surrendered. It's over. It's done. Zelensky, meanwhile, is on Ukrainian media, not reported in the West so much, telling them that it was an evacuation order by us. It's all under control by us. It's not a surrendering at all. And indeed that the request to be transferred to a third country was granted to Donbass.
Right.
So was that any of that communicated? Does a Western audience know what just happened in Azovstal?
No.
The last thing they heard was that heroes of Ukraine, heroes of Azovstal, last stand a week ago. But in the space of a week,
It's all gone.
it's gone.
It's done. And it's done. And it's gone. Yeah. Well, that's the just the extent of the propaganda and the spin in the media. Like it's just got really extreme where
Saturated.
It's so extreme where it really is night and day. What the media's reporting, what's actually happening, is literally just flip it 180 degrees, turn it around, turn it on its head, almost. Speaking of which, well, actually,
That's not the end of Azov Brigade, by the way.
no,
I think we should.
weren't all there. Like,
It's there's a Twitter channel, RWA, Russians with Attitude. They did a very good descriptive thread on the background and kind of structure of Azov Brigade. He says, he was pointing out, it's not just a Nazi militia. It's not just a specific military unit here in this one physical location. It's a buildup of an ideological movement in Ukraine. So denazifying is not just simply they were all in one place and now Russia has captured them. There's a lot more to it than this. He described it as a large and successful political movement with deep ties to the government back in Kiev, which hasn't been touched by Russia yet, remember? To organized crime, to domestic and foreign intelligence services, and to extremist organizations all over the world. We touched on that last week. What are the potential links between Nazis popping off in places as far-flung as Christchurch, New Zealand, and Buffalo on the Canadian border with this Azov battalion, in quotes, in Ukraine? God knows how much work and groundwork has been done. We played Kirby last week, gleefully boasting about how they spent the last 8 years, but it predates 8 years of U.S. involvement in extremist networks.
yeah, for sure.
Into and out of Ukraine.
Well, you got to go back to the Second World War, and the fact that today, if you just throw that up, it's just an example of what you're saying. People today, the media reports on Ukrainian neo-Nazi types, fascist type, ultra-nationalist types. Just scroll down to there's a list of links, a little bit more. Yeah, that one there. So this is from, compared to today, this is a list, I think it's 30 or so, that this is Moon of Alabama put together. So I mean, you can just look down the list there, and it's all from Western media, even foreign policy, NBC News, BBC, and it's these are just the headlines. 15,000 Ukrainian nationalists march for divisive Bandera. Is the US backing neo-Nazis in Ukraine? That's Salon. How the far right took top posts in Ukraine's power vacuum. Channel 4, that's UK Channel 4. Reign in Ukraine's neo-fascists. That's CNN. Denying the far right role in the Ukrainian revolution. The neo-Nazi question in Ukraine. Yes, there are bad guys in the Ukrainian government. Neo-Nazi question in Ukraine. Fascism returns to the continent it once destroyed. Ukraine conflict. White power warrior from Sweden. German TV shows Nazi symbols on helmets of Ukraine soldiers. The reality of neo-Nazis in Ukraine is far from Kremlin propaganda. That was The Hill, a conservative outlet in the US. In Ukraine, ultranationalist militia strikes fear in some quarters. That's Radio Free Europe. America's collusion with neo-Nazis is in the nation. As of Ukraine's most prominent ultranationalist group sets its sights on US and Europe. That's again Radio Free Europe, basically US intelligence outlet, effectively. The Guardian, ultranationalism in Ukraine, a photo essay. Is America training neo-Nazis in Ukraine? The Atlantic Council, the Azov Regiment, has not depoliticized. So that's just a few selections of 30 or more, and there's more than that, obviously, over the past
8 years, going back to 2014.
Yeah.
But
well, the media reported
older
on
than
them
that.
as they actually were, and that the reality of a significant neo-Nazi type ideology and fascist ideology in Ukraine, in the political establishment and in the military establishment, it was like, and these are, Vice News, uber lefty, everything anti-Russian, came to the same conclusion. But now you just flip it. Now all of that goes away. Now none of that's true because we have to be anti-Russian.
What they will say in their defense is, yeah, we were talking about it. But the caveat is, with the exception of perhaps people like the Grey Zone doing reports on the Nazi battalions going back the last 8 years, very few of those are going to talk about the extent to which they're 100% funded and reliant on NATO,
Yeah.
i.e. the United States. So it's kind of like,
Basically,
they set up a scene where there's, it's not us, it's the arm over there. Yeah, we're feeding it, but it's not our arm. It's a neo-Nazi problem in Ukraine.
what are you feeding it for?
Well, because Russia's the bigger evil.
Right,
And
exactly.
so it's justified. So Facebook
So
goes,
Russia's a
well,
bigger
now you
evil.
can talk.
That's
You can big up Azov battalion because they're killing Russians.
That's why you had to demonize Putin and Russia over the past
Yeah.
10 years in order to...
in order to somehow
Present Russia.
make Russia be out Nazis, so that when
Right.
you have a Nazi here, you go, it's just a little Nazi. The big Nazi over there is the
Right.
one they're fighting.
Basically, a good historical reference or context for this is the US's and NATO's stay-behind networks
Yeah.
that they created and set up in Europe.
After World War II.
Yeah. To prevent, like basically these were like extremist, either left or sometimes right wing. It didn't matter the ideology basically, but they were
Always blamed on the left, but carried
Right.
out by people who believed themselves to be part of a far right network. but
exactly.
actually, they
Right.
were CIA and NATO linked.
right, and they were basically they presented themselves as right extreme left wing associated with communist type groups that would carry out terror attacks in Europe in order effectively to sway public opinion against the Soviet Union and communism in European countries in order to keep Europe in the Western sphere by terrorizing the population. So it's this the funding and training and using of the neo-Nazi type ideology in Ukraine is similar to that. You know what I mean? It's similar in its nature and its function.
Yeah.
Anti-Russian, basically anti.
The same rationales at
expansion.
work. The same.
Yeah.
It's just one continuity. It's such a that happened in the age before the internet. You only had mainstream reports on it. Not that would it have made a difference in the internet age? Just how it helped, but just how widespread is knowledge today that terror attacks are not just, coming out of the blue from jihadi extremists and so on.
Well, you have to
Like
read
there was a string of like shootings in supermarkets in Belgium in the 1980s, all unsolved.
Italy,
Eventually later linked
France.
to stay behind units. Someone had found the cache of weapons and taken the M16s or whatever they were and started shooting people up.
Yeah, we talked about that years ago. We talked about the book, the kind of best book on that, I think, is Daniele Ganser, NATO's
Secret Armies.
Secret Armies, it's called, yeah.
Yeah.
It talks about all of that, basically, so, and it's documented, so whatever. Anyway, so if it's not monkeypox, you're going to starve. I just want to let you know that you're going to starve very soon. Let me just prove that to you by, you can throw up pretty much all the Telegraph articles. One of them was a Times article, but just start with any of the Telegraph articles. Let's see which one you put up first. There you go. Vladimir Putin is trying to starve the world into submission. Here's how. A 3-point. Here's how in badly drawn pictures. Bombed rail lines, blocked ports, and attacks on grain silos in Ukraine are threatening food supplies across Europe. See that poor Ukrainian farmer there? He's not happy with Putin. See that his face? He's very, very unhappy that Putin is trying to starve the entire world. Yeah. The title is Vladimir Putin is trying to starve the world into submission. The whole world, because obviously the implication in the title there is that it's Putin against the world. The whole world, right? Including China, including
Africa,
South America,
Middle East.
Bolsonaro, Middle East, Saudis, all of the ones who are friends with Putin effectively and haven't followed the international community sanctions. He's trying to starve all of them too. The entire world. There's a lot of people trying to starve, but Putin, he can do it.
if he can bend space time, he could starve the world.
Yeah,
but
and
thankfully,
then even worse,
our dear
worse than
leaders
that.
in the West are going to save us.
Well, go to the next one, but the one that's called Mountains of Grain, Telegraph. Mountains of grain. Not only is he stopping the grain getting out of Ukraine, and of course, as everybody knows, Ukraine is the only supplier of grain in the world, right? So once you stop it coming out of Ukraine, everybody starves. So there's mountains, literal mountains. I think the last mountain somebody just summited it the other day. It was like 10,000 meters, like higher than Everest, I think, in Ukraine.
Really?
A mountain of grain, and it's left to rot.
To rot.
And in fact, I think they're putting active rotting agents in it to speed up the rotting because Putin wants to kill people as quickly as possible.
That makes sense.
Yep.
If it's Putin, that definitely makes sense.
Kremlin's blockade of Ukrainian ports is crippling the world's food production as shipping containers sit loaded with immovable crops. You can go to Times, Sunday Times, just for more evidence. Black Sea blockade in Russia, Ukraine war threatens food supply. Bit more temperate, from the Times, bit more sober,
Bit
but
more
still,
British.
it's going to cut national wheat exports by 35%. Of course, Ukraine's south coast, that's from Ukraine, so their exports are going to be down 35% this year, which may be true, but you have to remember, I think the last figure I saw, I don't even know if it's just wheat. It may be just wheat. I'll have to look it up, but maybe just wheat or maybe wheat and other grains, but 3%. Ukraine supplies 3% of the world's wheat and maybe other crops. So, and you take 35% off that, that's 1%. So when you remove 1% of the world's wheat supply, everybody dies, as the British press are telling us. And it's all down to Putin. But then, yes, you said the US is
I have a
going to...
table here. Do you want to see a comparative table?
Yeah, go ahead.
That's the one I just sent you, Scott. These are the top 20 wheat exporters in the world. No, Ukraine isn't the daddy of them all. Russia is, by a factor of 2 over Canada, then the United States, then France, then number 5, Ukraine.
But that's 8.9% of the top 20. And the tonnage.
Right.
But that doesn't, like, the actual figure is about 3% if it's only wheat of the total wheat exports. So and then you're saying it's going to be down 35%, which means it's going to be down by 1%. So overall, wheat exports this year for the world will be down 1%.
So
99, that means
Putin's gonna cause
99%
a
of the
global
wheat will
famine.
still be available. What?
Putin's going to cause a global famine. Let's allow it let's allow them what they're telling us. Putin caused 35% less exports of wheat from Ukraine this year, which is going to hit 1% of the world's food supply of wheat,
Right.
which will be Putin causing a global famine.
Putin will be starving the entire world, as the Telegraph just told us, into submission. But not if the US, just go to the last Telegraph article, I think it's the last one, US missiles. The US is going to, and, led by this guy, Anthony Blinken, US missiles could end Putin's food blockade. Handful of nations said to be open to sending harpoons to sink Russian war vessels in the Black Sea. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure a harpoon isn't going to do much damage to a modern warship. That usually for whales. Has the US just got it totally wrong there? Or are they running out of supplies?
I don't know. They've been chucking javelins at those tanks, and they're making some.
They
headway.
talk them up, but javelin, I mean, I remember there was one guy killed at the Olympics way back in the day
Yeah.
in the javelin throwing
Yeah.
competition. That it was a freak accident where he
Yeah.
actually got hit with a javelin,
They're pretty heavy, those things, when they come
Yeah,
in.
yeah,
you know,
exactly.
Especially if you chuck them
Yeah.
real high.
Especially if a Nazi's throwing them.
So if you fire a harpoon at a Russian ship, the Russian ships are like made of tin.
Donk.
If you puncture a hole in it, like
It'll sink straight away.
It's
Yeah.
gone.
That's what happened to the Moskva. Anyway, so yeah. So is Russia?
This has been in the media all week. The US is driving this, obviously. What happened was Blinken went to the UN, and at a security meeting there, he had it out with the Russian guy, the baldy, Valery Nebenzia or something. He accused Russia of blockading Ukraine's ports and, quote, weaponizing food to create a global food crisis. Nebenzia, Vasily Nebenzia, laughed him out of the room. Quote, attempts to lay the accusations at our door aren't just absurd, they're blasphemous. And instead, he blamed Kiev for blocking Ukraine's ports, saying that Ukrainian forces had placed mines all along the Black Sea coast. Now, there is a trail of evidence about this, because you can look back over the last few months, and ships in the Black Sea have been hit by mines. They've also been shelled at. Sometimes the accusation is placed at Russia's doorstep, sometimes at Ukraine's. I doubt the Russians were firing at civilian cargo ships. Most likely that was the Yukis. The situation with the mines is so bad that hundreds of them are now drifting from the ports. They're in the Black Sea.
They're not in Turkey,
Russia
yeah.
wants to demine them, but they say they can't. Kiev's not cooperating. Here's my question to you, though. Would there not be some basis to this claim that, quote, Russia is blockading Ukraine's ports, given that the maps show Russia controls almost all of Ukraine's Black Sea coast?
It's a complicated situation. Like if you go to the IMO.org, this is the International Maritime Organization, so pretty neutral. Just an article they put up about an update on the maritime security and safety in the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. So, first paragraph, the ongoing armed conflict between the Russian Federation and Ukraine presents a serious and immediate threat to the safety and security of crews and vessels operating in the region. The IMO is continuing to liaise closely with all key stakeholders, blah, 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 blah. The next part, I want to go to at the third paragraph. At the start of the conflict, approximately 2,000 seafarers were stranded aboard 94 vessels in Ukrainian ports. At the start of the conflict, before Russia was anywhere near the
ports themselves.
The ports themselves,
Yeah.
or Mariupol or anything like that. At the start of the conflict, 2,000 seafarers were already stranded on 94 vessels. Only 10 vessels have subsequently safely departed the Sea of Azov, and 84 merchant ships remain with nearly 450 seafarers aboard. And then just go down to, it begins with the council. It's under, a blue safe maritime corridor. The council
Midway down.
on 10th and 11th of March agreed to encourage the establishment as a provisional and urgent measure of a blue safe maritime corridor to allow the safe evacuation of seafarers and ships from the high risk and affected areas of the Black Sea and Sea of Azov to a safe place in order to protect the life of seafarers and ensure the mobilization and commercial navigation of vessels. intending to use the corridor by avoiding military attacks and protecting and securing the maritime domain. The Russian Federation has informed the IMO that it had established a humanitarian corridor to provide for the safe evacuation of ships once outside the territorial waters of Ukraine. Despite this initiative, there remain many safety and security issues which hamper access to the corridor, and this is the important part, and the ability for ships to depart from their berths in Ukrainian ports, of which Russia holds maybe one right now, one or two. Ukraine's ports are at MARSEC, which is Maritime Security Level 3, and remain closed for entry and exit. Sea mines have been laid in port approaches, and some port exits are blocked by sunken barges and cranes. Many ships no longer have sufficient crew on board to sail. Ukraine also provided their preconditions for the safe evacuation of ships from their ports. These include an end to hostilities, the withdrawal of troops, and ensuring the free navigation in the Black Sea and Sea of Azov, including carrying out minesweeping activities with the involvement of Black Sea littoral states. Remember that, or notice that part. Ukraine provided preconditions for the safe evacuation of ships. That's Zelensky has said, here are the conditions for the safe evacuation of ships from the ports that we control, which are most of the ports in the Black Sea. And he said basically, Russia has to go home, or these ships aren't going anywhere. And anyway, we, the Ukrainian military or navy, mined the areas in front and around the ports again in order to try and prevent the Russian navy from approaching. And that MARSEC, the Maritime Security Level, that's imposed by the
IMO.
No, it's imposed by the countries,
Oh,
the host country, or
right.
the country
Yeah,
ports you're talking
Ukraine
about.
here.
So it's the Ukrainian government who has imposed that Maritime Security Level 3, which means that nobody moves.
Right.
So
So who's weaponizing food then? Is it Putin or is it?
or is it the Pentagon? Or is it America and its friends in Ukraine?
The
The
UN?
last, just down one more. The next paragraph. It also has laid some 400 anchor mines around Odessa. This is Ukrainian Navy. Laid some 400 anchor mines around Odessa, which are so old that some of them have parted from their chains and drifted towards Turkey. It does not allow Russia to demine the area. So you tell me what grain ships or ships full of grain are going to, in their right mind, any captains or crew of those ships are going to move anywhere, move from port under those conditions that are being imposed by the Ukrainian government. And that's from the International Maritime Organization. They're not like some Russian, that's an international neutral, just talk about maritime conditions.
Yeah.
Just here's the facts basically.
So this is basically the latest. This is the latest bucha. This is the latest atrocity Russia is about to commit.
The very last
nonsense.
The very last paragraph. Meanwhile, foreign ships that had been held by Ukraine in Mariupol have been able to leave since Russia has taken the city and its harbour.
Right. Mariupol, whose mayor this week said the city is liberated and people are finally getting
So
back to
ships are
normal
going
life.
from Mariupol, but not from most of the majority of
Not from
other Russian or Ukrainian ports that are held by Ukraine.
A major one, which is Odessa, which
Right.
is the one part the Russians are not anywhere near.
Right.
What's his name? Jean-Michel Charles, what is he now? He's European Commission head
Douchebag.
deputy to von der Leyen, ex-Belgian Prime Minister. Jesus, whatever. He pops up in Odessa this week for a photo op to visit these piled high grain silos that aren't moving anywhere. He's surrounded by, Yuki's protecting him, and he's giving a lecture on how awful it is that this grain I'm standing right next to here is blockaded by that country over there, Russia.
When in fact Ukraine.
the people standing around him are the ones
who are
keeping it from
blockading.
leaving the port.
Yeah, so just compare that article. I mean, we'll put it in the links. It's the International Maritime Organization. Like I said, just the facts. There's no agenda. And compare their report on the situation to what we just read from the Western media, which is exactly the opposite, really. Anyway, that's the state of the world.
And the UN is not helping here. At this UN security meeting about this topic, Guterres, the Secretary General, he said he's trying to get Russia to
He's pleading with them,
Russia
begging Russia
to lift its
think of the children.
To lift its own sanctions against
For the children. For the children.
He's doing it for
For the children.
Yeah.
They're conflating two different things here. This isn't about getting Ukrainian grain out. the UN at the same time is making a big stink out of the fact that fertilizers are not leaving Belarus and Russia. Right. But they're not leaving Belarus and Russia because those companies were sanctioned initially. Those sanctions, as we saw a couple of months ago, were imposed late last year. They've since been lifted. And so the US is going, well, there's no sanctions on agricultural products coming from Russia. Why doesn't Russia trade in those? Because they themselves, the Russians and the Belarusians, they've said, well, we're going to withhold the export of those things. Even though initially it was you who sanctioned us, then you realize your mistake and you lifted the sanctions. But actually, we're going to maintain that status quo of sanctions with unfriendly countries because you have since launched a full-scale economic war against us.
Yeah, they're allowed to use that as leverage since it's just
100% they are, but it's thrown in there as another thing Russia's doing to cause a global famine. No, shitheads, you started it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, they started, but it goes back further than that, obviously, because if you go to Market Realist, Scotty, it's just an example. You can find many other articles that say the same thing. This is from October 18th, 2021. Long before any talk about Ukraine or Russia or any sanctions or anything like that. Talking about the shortage at a lot of places isn't an actual shortage, but a supply. This is in the US. Is a supply constraint due to logistical issues, especially in developed markets like the US and the UK. And then go down to food shortage in the US. While there isn't a widespread food shortage across the US, there are pockets experiencing strain like bottled water and turkeys. Blah blah blah. Most of the issues in the US are localized. Keep going down. But then go down to global food shortage. In contrast to the US, the food shortage around the world isn't just a factor of supply chain issues. According to a rapid phone survey done by the World Bank in 48 countries, a significant number of people are running out of food or reducing their consumption. Global food prices have had a 10-year peak, according to the Food and Agriculture Organization, driven by gains in cereals and vegetable oils. Despite record cereal consumption, a shortage is forecasted on higher consumption projections. Of course, you find other articles that will talk, accurately talk about the fact that, this is from October 2021. There was talk before that. We were talking about the supply chain issues and all that kind of stuff as a result of COVID
lockdowns.
or other COVID measures,
Yeah.
lockdowns. So it's people people, it's like goldfish memory. If you've got a goldfish memory, then forget about it. Stop even bothering watching anything, because all it does is like periodically scare you, and you can't make any sense of it. All you do is just respond like they want you to do, which is be terrorized. You can't put it in context. It's not that it isn't concerning and you shouldn't be worried about it and stuff, but you need to have the context in order to see why it's happening and not believe the bullshit or the bullshit reason they give you for why this particular thing is happening, because you can't remember 6 months ago.
Yeah. I want to correct myself. I said earlier that Belarus was the target of sanctions because of this war. No. Belarus, for some reason, I guess it's to do with its soil and its unique climate or something, supplies 90% of a key fertilizer for the whole world, potash fertilizer. The company, this semi-state-owned company, was sanctioned by the United States last summer.
Right.
Because democracy, because the US was claiming that Lukashenko had rigged the elections and therefore he's got to go. And they had a whole, color revolution type thing going on. He didn't fall, he stays in power, so they sanctioned him. And this was one way they were going to hurt Belarus.
Right.
Now they're trying to plead with Belarus to try and make up for the shortfall in fertilizers that's not coming from Russia because of its counter sanctions against unfriendly countries in the West.
Well, if you look up,
what a freaking mess!
If you look up the detail, if you look up, just do a search for news items reporting on sanctions and fertilizers and fertilizer shortage and sanctions in Russia, or whatever combination of words, you won't find anywhere anyone claiming that Russia or Belarus is depriving the world in the same way they're depriving the world of grain, supposedly, from Ukraine. That they're not selling their fertilizer. All of the reports don't go there because there's no evidence for it, obviously. Because that would be a far better way for Putin to starve the world. Don't. I mean, that's small potatoes in Ukraine. It's you've only achieved 1% reduction if that's what you're doing, even though it's Ukraine who's doing it. And that's why they can do it, because it's only 1%. It's not significant. It doesn't matter, except the media tells you it matters, but it doesn't matter because it's a tiny percentage of the world's supply of grain. Far better way to do it is cut off the fertilizer supply to the world. Then you can't even grow the crops. Forget about not shipping them out. You don't have any crops to ship.
Yeah.
But apparently that's not happening. So the only thing they can come up with is that, Russia, Ukraine led to quote unquote justified sanctions on Russian energy, and natural gas and obviously and oil are key ingredients or key components in the production of fertilizers.
Yeah.
So if countries don't have access to enough oil or gas, or if oil or gas, the main thing is it's not that they can't produce fertilizers, but the price has gone up. Because the price of oil and gas have gone up, the price of fertilizers go up, and farmers then are feeling a pinch. They don't know if they can afford, to buy fertilizer at that price. They reduce their crop, their planting, because they have only a certain amount of fertilizer because they can't afford it, right? Because obviously food production around the world is a massively complex system, and it's small to medium to big farmers who are all contributing to it, and they're in different economic areas of the world and in different economic situations, each of them, So it's something that's just brewing, basically, But that's the only thing you'll see in terms of the explanation for why there's a fertilizer problem or a shortage of fertilizer, is that the price of oil and gas has exploded. And why did it explode? Because the West decided to try to crush Russia economically by sanctioning their Russian their oil and potentially gas exports, with the result that the Russian currency is at multi-year lows or highs, however you want to describe it. It's
50,
in a better
50 something now.
It's in this, below 60 basically, which is, I think it wasn't that in such good shape, let's say,
against the dollar,
and the euro since like 2017. So they're all doing it to their own people. Western governments are doing this to their own people. They're the ones who are causing all of this. They don't care. They have some ideological bullshit that it's to teach Putin a lesson. That's about the height of it. That's all they tell you. But that's what they're doing. They're creating these conditions for food shortages, energy shortages, and you're meant to suck it up and say, take that, Putin, and at the same time blame Putin
at
for
the same
doing
time
it.
blame him. It's crazy. The Russian ambassador at the UN responding to Blinken, as the Wall Street Journal characterized it, he deflected any of the blame, and instead he blamed food supply problems on the lockdown's effect on supply chains. Check, we just discussed that. Weather, that is an effect actually. Mm-hmm. Trade wars, he's thinking of China probably. This predates the sanctions, which are another factor. Speculation by Western investors, and even efforts in industrialized nations to wean their economies off fossil fuels. That's your own.
Is that too much for the
Sri
average?
Lanka last week.
Is that too much for the average person? Is it too? Is it a conspiracy theory, or is it too much to expect the average person to put together the fact that they've been bombarded with greening of your economy? Stop using fossil fuels are evil. Fossil fuels are killing people. They're warming the planet. They're destroying the planet. We got to stop. We got to go green. We got to go green. And so the whole point: destroy the fossil fuel industry and stop people using fossil fuels. And they weren't. They've been talking about that for a long time. Obviously, they didn't make much headway, it seems. And now, suddenly, they get to shut down, to a certain extent, at least Western countries' access to fossil fuels by blaming Putin and doing it themselves, basically using Putin to go ahead and let's just shut down the fossil fuels. Is that too much for people to see that as a segue? They just decided to go that route because obviously just berating people about that you're destroying the planet and trying to get them to go green and stuff wasn't working. So you know what, we're just going to go ahead and do it anyway. But we need a good reason. Putin's evil.
Yeah, I think that's why they were so delighted that Putin took the bait so to speak, in quotes, because obviously he was the mind game going on where he saw what the trap was, but he, as far as they're concerned, they succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. He took the bait and invaded Ukraine, because now they could suddenly go, oh, look at this, gas prices. Oh my goodness, inflation. Where did you come from? Oh, look at that, food shortages on the shelves. Well, goodness me. They can now acknowledge the things that were building up like a dam behind. And before they were like, what? No, everything's fine. Inflation is good for you, you know. But now it's like, yes, all these horrible things are happening. It's his fault.
Yeah. Is it bait when you know it's bait? Are you taking the bait when you know that it's bait? But you basically have no choice. You've been put in a position. It's more like you've been put into a corner, and you're, in a way, you're forced to do something, but that you otherwise wouldn't want to do. But that's life, and these are the conditions. I'm going to go ahead and do this, but I'm doing it on my terms. You know, I saw your bait dangling from a long way off. I saw your bait coming, and I prepared the way I'm going to take it.
Yeah, it's not really, but...
Yeah, because taking the bait sounds like fooled into something.
He was
that,
fooled,
you know what I mean?
He wasn't fooled. They announced their intentions ages ago. Remember in December, we were like amazed by those reports. Anonymous White House reports say, if/when Putin invades Ukraine, we've got a whole list of juicy sanctions lined up. That's what I mean. That's what I'm getting at here. The glee with which they were going to go into this, because it was about to provide a structural explanation for everything that's gone wrong and everything they want to do with this crisis, you know?
Yeah, or Liz Truss, the
Do
foreign
away
secretary.
with fossil fuels, for example.
Or Liz Truss, the foreign secretary, the UK foreign secretary, was it Blinken, whoever we talked about last week, saying that they had been preparing for this war.
Kirby
said it, preparing for this war for 8 years.
8 years, and he just gleeful. You see
How
it in
can
his
it
face.
just come out of nowhere? Like, I mean, obviously, if they're preparing for this war for 8 years, in a foreign country against Russia, decidedly a war against Russia using a third country, you've been preparing it for 8 years while Russia watched you prepare for it. There's never been any mention that Russia was preparing to invade Ukraine. Any serious mention that Russia was planning to take preemptive, aggressive moves towards Ukraine or toward. I mean, they tried to say they took Crimea and stuff, but you know that's separate. That's a separate issue. That's a Kosovo issue, and you can't get away. I mean, they can't avoid that Kosovo comparison. You know. They recognized under Bush. They recognized in 2008, whatever it was 2008. They recognized Kosovo's independence because the people in Kosovo no longer wanted to be a part of Serbia, and they said, okay, you can be an independent people because you don't like that government and the country that you're a part of. You can break away, and we'll recognize your independence. Same thing happens in Ukraine, part of Eastern Ukraine. The people say exactly the same thing. Russia and a few other countries say, okay, will recognize it because you are under, and the people in Kosovo weren't necessarily under any kind of, it was more of a political, ideological thing. They weren't under the same kind of attacks that the people in Donbass were, you know.
Right. Although officially,
They would
the
say they
official
were.
historical record is they were. That was the justification for bombing Belgrade.
Right.
Because Milosevic, it
Well,
looks like he's about to,
Well, that's
to
back-
quote Tony Blair, slaughter 10,000
That's
Kosovo
back in the
Albanians.
90s, but I'm talking about when they actually declared independence.
Right.
There was no immediate threat.
No.
But in 2014, when the US staged a coup in Ukraine and installed a bunch of neo-Nazis, they immediately launched a war on Donbass
Yeah.
and since then and now, killed 14,000 people.
Yeah. Giving Putin his, not that he needed, not that he's that cynical, but giving him the evidence, the just cause for doing what he did.
Of course.
A R2P, right to protect, humanitarian intervention or preemptive war, as laid down in international law by past cases. That's what happens. You set an example. You set a precedent.
US, here's a small example. The US gives a small comparison. The US gives funding, military training, military equipment to Mexico to launch an operation to take, Russia. Russia gives arms Mexico, gives them weapons and uses their own military equipment as well to take Guantanamo Bay from America.
Shouldn't that be Cuba? Well, whatever.
Yeah.
Mexico.
Well, Guantanamo Bay. Or Cuba. Could be Cuba, yeah. Whatever. Any other third country. What does America do? They have a military base in Guantanamo Bay. Russia's going to take it under the cover of Cuba taking it back, or even, any other relatively close Central American country. What does America do? America sees through it or sees it immediately as a threat and says no and goes and defend and secures it, right? That's pretty much the situation with Crimea. Crimea was obviously predominantly ethnically Russian-speaking people, and Russia had its major southern naval base there. The coup in 2014 was, a big part of it was to take Crimea away from Russia.
I think a better analogy would be Florida,
Yeah. The wiener.
because Crimea was full of actual Russians.
Russia's
So-
getting Cuba to take America's
If
wiener.
Florida had declared secession in the 90s from the United States, but part of the agreement, okay, you can have your independence, but we get to keep our naval bases in Pensacola and elsewhere, and launch rockets from Cape Canaveral. Okay, fine. Then 20 years later, they renege and they say, actually, no, you're gone. In fact, we're going to allow Russians to launch rockets from Cape Canaveral and Russians to take over Pensacola Naval Base.
Yeah.
And then Washington goes, no,
No.
hold our beer. Watch this.
Yeah.
That's the analogy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Because,
valid.
I mean, shit, that's not even a good analogy because Crimea has been Russia since 1700s.
Yeah.
Florida's been the United States since 18... Does
Something or
anyone
other.
know? So early 19th century, I think. So, anyway.
I'll talk about if you got anything else on.
Do you remember Ukraine and NATO? Right up till the beginning of this, in February, Ukraine was poised to join NATO, was applying to join NATO.
It was never a serious option, though. They were never going to be allowed because they've got certain. It's weird because I think in order to join NATO, it's kind of similar in a way to, even though it's a military alliance, it's similar to the EU in a certain way. Part of the requirements to become a NATO member is that you cannot have any kind of potential ethnic conflict or ethnic tensions within your country. Anything that could flare up basically. So Ukraine was never going to join NATO, at least not in the short or medium term, for the very reason that they now deny is actually the case in Ukraine, i.e. there's a big part of ethnic Russians in Ukraine who don't really feel Ukrainian, feel more Russian, speak Russian, have a lot of connections with Russian stuff. Because of that kind of tension and division in Ukraine that was bubbling under the surface, and also because of the kind of the neo-fascist or neo-Nazi tendencies within the military and within political structures, it was never going to be. It didn't pass muster for a NATO admission. But that the fact that that was the reason that Ukraine was never going to be part of NATO justifies everything in a certain sense that Russia has done, or justifies it underpins their argument essentially that there is this issue in Ukraine. There's ethnic Russians and there's tension between ongoing long term below the surface, but it's there, and it's flared up basically. It's been exploited,
But for official purposes, in the media, people were being led to believe that Ukraine wanted to join NATO officially.
They wanted to they can want all they want, yeah.
The US wanted Ukraine to join NATO. Russia did not want it.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, Russia preemptively invaded Ukraine to stop Ukraine from joining NATO.
Not really, no.
That's not
No.
not the official kind of reason.
Western narrative, you mean?
Yeah.
When they give something, basically, when they give some justification, some, not completely black and white anti-Russian propaganda, they'll say, okay, we admit that. You're saying they admit that NATO that Ukraine might have joined NATO, and that was a justification for Russia to do what it did. Don't think so. That's not the reason, obviously. Anyway,
The Atlantic, the top magazine for Washington foreign policy people, one of them.
neocons.
April, the war started. Op-ed, let Ukraine in. That's just one example. Another one from a European magazine, why Ukraine has won the right to join NATO, also from April
April what? 2021.
2022.
Well, yeah, that's after it all started.
Of course, when it started in early March, in nod to Russia, Ukraine says no longer insisting on NATO membership.
Yeah,
Anyway,
it was all that insisting, but it was never going to be, never going to happen, and they've admitted that. They admit that now, you know. We're
Well,
not
that-
going to join, all that kind of stuff. And they're also not going to join the EU. So all these aspirations, Euromaidan, the 2014 coup and all that kind of stuff, it was never going to happen. You know what I mean? But for structural, economic, demographic, ideological, political, social issues, it was a very long way off. And
Yeah.
not least of which, well, added into the mix was the fact that it's right on Russia's border, the geopolitical aspect of it too. But removing the geopolitical aspect of it, removing Russia's interest in keeping Ukraine a neutral country, which is fair enough, beyond that, Ukraine was not in a position to join NATO or, because we just talked, you just mentioned John Kirby. It doesn't matter that they're not a part of NATO. They've been training their military and equipping their military for 8 years to fight against Russia. That's more or less what NATO's for, right?
yeah.
So it doesn't matter. Not
do-
officially a member, but who cares? Yeah.
Do you want to watch that video of McFaul recently?
McFaul, I hate him, yeah. I don't really hate him, but...
I've sent it to you, Scott. Can you play that? This is the former U.S. ambassador to Russia.
He summarizes
Michael McFaul,
for
is it
me
Scott? What is
the arrogance and...
So before we play it, this is from Toronto last week, the Monk debate. He's in a debate on the same side as the ex-Prime Minister of Poland, Sikorski. Opposite him is this guy, Stephen Walt, and John Mearsheimer.
Mm-hmm.
And watch it. He's going to... This is McFaul schooling these two international relations experts, so-called,
how the world really
on
works.
how the world actually works.
In 2021, we kept reiterating that Ukraine was going to join. We kept saying that over and over again. So our diplomats are lying.
Yes.
So
Yes. That's the real world, guys. Come on.
I
Come
get
on.
that, but you
Diplomats
can,
lie.
That's the real
yet-
world.
Wait a sec. Our diplomats are lying all the time, yet the Russians should trust them when they offer assurances.
No.
And we shouldn't.
Please,
no,
can
but
I-
here's my question: if Ukraine membership in NATO is really, realistically off the table, just not going to happen, nothing for Russia to worry about, why shouldn't NATO take it back? Say we've rethought the matter. We no longer want to consider Ukraine for NATO membership. If it's never going to happen, why not do a very simple thing that might help unwind this?
Because that would be an invitation for Russia to invade. And as you know,
I believe
Russia,
that's already happened.
the United States,
Exactly.
Exactly. I'd love to know what a comeback to that would have been. They did invade.
Of course, yeah, we're already at that point.
Yeah, at that. Yeah.
But McFaul there, it's slimy. He's on Twitter. Like, I mean, I harass him now and again on Twitter. Like, just because he deserves it, because he's so full of shit. It's amazing. Like, he's such a pusillanimous, arrogant little prick, and always has been.
Yeah.
He goes back a long way,
That laugh said it all. Remind me of Pompeo. We lied, we cheated, we stole. Ha, ha, ha.
Yeah, it's all funny, to them. But what he was saying there was that, of course, we lied. And the whole point, what he didn't say, but the obvious implication was that they were lying in terms of talking up, like was that Mearsheimer or Walt, whatever.
That
One of
was
the two,
Walt, yeah.
Walt saying, we said repeatedly, we were talking it up, NATO,
Yeah.
Ukraine's going to join NATO, Ukraine's going to join NATO, was in order to
Bait.
jerk the Russians.
Or jerk.
Russia's chain and build it up. Because so, like, again, planning it for 8 years, training, arming, funding the Ukrainian military for 8 years for this very situation, and then in the year prior to when they know they're ready to to do what they planned to do, which was invade Donbass with the US trained military in March this year. In advance of that, so last year in 2021, they're talking up the NATO.
They
just
hyped up
hype it up.
all
NATO's going to
last
join.
year.
NATO's going to,
But knowing that it was never actually
they
gonna happen.
openly, flagrantly provoked Russia, and not only in words, but they're doing it in many different ways. And of course, this is in the context of them having done this to Russia and being anti-Russian and aggressive towards Russia and unfair towards Russia for the past, well, at least 10 years.
Yeah.
Probably longer, but very overtly for the last 10 years being very, very anti-Russian. So they've been goading, provoking, and putting things in place that make it clear that that this isn't just talk, but talk is part of it as well. You know, they want everybody talking about NATO, Ukraine joining NATO. But again, like as Walt just said there, it doesn't matter. Russia already invaded. What are you talking about? Like the former Polish Prime Minister was saying, you know, no. If we say that, okay, NATO membership for Ukraine is off the table,
It will be an invitation.
That invitation for Russia to invade. They already invited them to invade a long time ago by making it clear that they were going to use Ukraine to attack Russia.
Yeah, that's the unspoken part in that debate. Yeah, it's not. No, it's the situation Ukraine is in is worse than NATO membership per se.
Mm-hmm.
It's a NATO it's an extraterritorial. It's outside NATO and it's fully controlled by NATO. Unlike say Turkey, which now has a substantially independent streak, especially after the 2016 attempted coup against Erdogan, right? Mm-hmm. So Erdogan says all the right thing. He's still in NATO. He's still in their club. But as we saw last week, when Finland and Sweden tried to join, he goes, no, you can't.
Well, yeah, because, you know,
Can he effect a veto?
You can, yeah. Any one member can affect the veto, but I don't know how far. You know, they could just rejigger the rules or something, and you know, say, yeah, it doesn't matter what you say. But again, it doesn't matter whether Ukraine is officially a part of NATO or not. The country is awash in U.S. military personnel, trainers, and massive amounts of U.S. military equipment. What isn't NATO about that? You know, there's American advisors that have their hands up Zelensky's bum, making him talk. What isn't NATO about that? You know what I mean? That's what NATO does. NATO is the puppet master in that sense, you know, for any other member countries. And Zelensky, actually, I was reading something there recently that Zelensky, an official, you know, decree or whatever, put to the, how's it pronounced, Verkhovna Rada, the parliament, basically, the Ukrainian parliament, a bill or something to formalize the status of Polish citizens, the legal rights of Polish citizens in Ukraine.
With the suggestion being
no suggestion.
No,
but
go on, say it.
But what does it suggest?
The harmonization of Polish and Ukrainian, West Ukrainian government?
Maybe, but I was thinking more likely that it's about establishing legalities for Polish soldiers. And
Living and occupying permanently in Western Ukraine.
Or being there for some particular reason, which presages an expansion of conflict.
You've been talking about for a while. I thought it was interesting that Macron brought up the possibility of this week. Although he was talking about he said he's afraid that war will spread from Ukraine specifically via Transnistria.
Yeah, maybe.
Also in The Guardian this week, Ukraine forces prepare for possible attack on Belarusian border. In an article which they're talking about their fears of it spreading. But both countries are probably off. Poland is probably the place to watch.
Well, isn't Transnistria is right there on the oh no, it's on the Romanian border. That's right. Yeah. Don't know. We'll have to wait and see. It's unknown. It's one of those things you have to wait and see where it'll go. But I mean,
do you notice how many people were calling for ceasefires this week?
Yeah.
That's all we have to say about how the war in Ukraine is going.
Yeah.
First of all, U.S. Defense Secretary Austin initiates a call with Shoigu requesting a ceasefire. 3 days later, General Milley talks to Gerasimov, who's supposed to be dead 3 times over at this point. He talks to a dead dude, asking him for a ceasefire. And yesterday, is it yesterday? Yeah, Zelensky told Ukrainian media that diplomacy is the only way this is going to be resolved at this point. Again,
You know
and
why?
it's Zelensky puppet, but still interesting signals. Like,
But it's not going to be resolved through diplomacy. He would like it to be resolved through diplomacy. That's his weasel words again, his diplomatic or his political speak, and the rest of them talking about diplomacy. It can only be. I've seen that, in not just him, but other people saying it can only be resolved through diplomacy. No, Russia's like, look, we're committed. We've already committed to this. We've committed a lot, and we've made a lot of sacrifices. We're getting what we intended to get out of this, whether you like it or not. And if there's going to be diplomacy, it'll be on our terms, whether you like it or not. And that's where it's going. And the reason they're talking about that is because in the conflict at the moment in Donbass is going pretty well compared to up until now, let's say, in terms of the advance and the movement of Russian forces in taking right up to the the major towns, Severodonetsk and a few other towns.
Lysychansk, Slovyansk.
Taking the to the original borders of the official borders of the Donbass of Donetsk and Luhansk. That's a major part of their goal.
Yeah.
They're pretty much. Mariupol was the first one. Second one is securing those borders, and then after that, maybe over they may continue on and over Odessa. The idea is the full Black Sea coast, basically, right over to the border of Transnistria.
Basically,
And-
that map of majority ethnic Russians,
Yes,
which is the
yes,
whole of the
yes,
east and
that's
the whole of the south.
Yeah, that's always been the plan from the
Do
very
you think
beginning.
so?
Yeah,
The whole thing.
Yeah,
Zaporizhia in the center, up to the Dnieper River.
possibly. Yeah,
No,
possibly.
Novorossiya, in other words,
Yeah,
so called.
and
That'd be glorious. I wanted that in 2014,
Yeah.
and I thought when it didn't happen, I thought,
Well, right
That's
now,
it now.
right now, there's a situation where there's something on the order of 25,000 Ukrainian troops in the relative near future are going to be taken prisoner. 25,000.
well, they're surrendering en masse, especially after Azovstal.
Yeah, that kind
Give
of
up.
yeah,
It
that
goes.
propaganda coup kind of failed and it hit morale a little bit. But the question that it brings up is, what were 25,000 troops doing? And there were more before now. Some have left and been redeployed elsewhere, but at least 25,000 troops could be taken prisoner. And that's not counting the number that's been killed, which is probably somewhere in the order of 30,000. But what were 25,000 troops? A part of a significantly larger force that was there originally. What were they doing on the borders of Donbass? Because they're there since this conflict began.
Well, I know how that'll
were-
be explained away. It'll be explained away because they're holding back a Russian.
No, but they were there from the
Slash.
beginning.
Yeah,
Before Russia announced any intentions or became clear that Russia had any intentions, they were there. They have been there since last year. Which the point is, they were planning
invasion
to
force.
invade
Yeah.
Donbass, and then from there, kill as many people as necessary, and then and maybe try and take Crimea and bring the war to Russia, basically, possibly across Russian borders. So, but have you anything else? Because I want to go back to monkeypox
no,
as
no,
a final
no.
thing.
That's all I have to say about the war in NATO-stan.
In Ukraine, Nam. Yeah, let's go to video.
Oh, Biden invaded Somalia. But
Biden invaded
invaded
Somalia.
Somalia
He
last
did,
week.
yeah.
to crickets.
Yeah. Monkeypox. Well, here's from the monkey himself. Let's watch this video. This is actually, there's a couple of Russian pranksters. They've been known,
Bovan and Lexus.
yeah, they've been known to kind of like call up politicians in the West and stuff and pose as the leaders of, Russia or different countries, a lot of Eastern European countries. Here they're posing as basic. I'm not sure if it's Zelensky. It could actually be Zelensky because the guy they're talking to is that dumb. Anyway, it relates to monkeypox, as you can see. There's patient zero right there.
Primate in chief.
That's where the monkeypox came from. A sample of his serum didn't have to be modified actually at all. Funnily enough,
I believe it is pure.
it was pure monkey. Anyway, so here he is. He's our president.
In fact, now it's a war not only of Ukraine. It's a war of West world against Russians.
Yeah.
Of course, Russia was offended that NATO began to expand. That's a problem for them. That's why they started. I'm talking about determination of DPR and LPR at regions of occupied regions by Russia on east side. So Putin tries to show that there's the same example like with Kosovo. You remember then in 2007 you recognized Kosovo as an independent country, and he used the same methodic.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think if you prevail, or when you prevail, a lot of these other issues go off the table.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, wise words.
Your mission is to destroy as many Russian troops as you can. And the question is, will you continue to receive the help you need? And I certainly hope so. And it's very important for the United States to continue in the lead of providing you the support you need. You've got good, it seems to me, you've got good communications with the administration. You know, your Secretary of Defense and people like that are continually informing our military of what's needed. And our military is very supportive of what you're doing, President.
Oh, you support us with javelins and many other missiles, so it's great. But last time the US has sent us Angelina Jolie. It's a kind of joke. Yeah.
So Bush thought he was talking to Zelensky.
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus Christ. But we're on Bush, so let's play it. I know this has gone around the world 20 times, but he also gave... Was that from this week? He also gave us this week the greatest Bushism yet. The all-time best Dubya expression when...
He's the gift that keeps on giving.
Do you have it, Scott?
Oh, what am I looking for?
Just sent it to you. It's a tweet of Dubya. Oh, yeah, you sent it to me. No, hang on. I sent it to myself.
There you go. It wasn't me or Scotty. It was
There
you.
it is.
Maybe Dubya's having an effect on my hair. Okay.
Yeah, here we go.
I think everyone's seen it, but let's watch it again. 26 million views. Awesome.
In contrast, Russian elections are rigged. Political opponents are imprisoned or otherwise eliminated from participating in the electoral process. The result is an absence of checks and balances in Russia and the decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of Iraq. I mean, of Ukraine. Iraq, too. Anyway.
Iraq, too.
75.
Booyah. God bless you, George. Look at him. He's speaking at his own event, the George W. Bush Institute.
How the F does he have an institute named after him? It's like, how is that possible?
Money and connections.
And is the flag supposed to be in the shape? It's wavy? Is that supposed to be like a book or something?
It's a book. He's reading a book.
I don't think he ever read a book in his life.
He's got a library named after
The poor
him.
man's stuck back in Iraq. Like, he's still on that aircraft carrier with the codpiece and, a mission accomplished. Like, I mean, that was the defining moment of his life, and his head just goes over that in his head all the time, and he just, so when he's talking about one man invading a country, he just can't help but say Iraq, like, because it was me.
That was my greatest moment.
Yeah, I mean, I pretended it was me, like, His greatest
the
moment.
one thing I like about Bush is he has not, except when he's probably forced to, or the money's just too good to refuse, he generally has stayed out of it. He occasionally makes a speech, he bashes Trump, defends Hillary, bashes Putin here again. But he's generally just like stayed out of the fray and prefers to just paint pictures.
Because that's all he can do.
And stay on his ranch.
He doesn't know anything else.
I know, but then they pull him up now and again.
Yeah.
It's like, you just got to read these lines, George. Just say the lines.
But he can't. Yeah.
He gets even that wrong.
Yeah. Well, I forgot to throw it up earlier on, but just throw up the Economist JPEG, or it's Econ, yeah. The Economist they put a lot of effort into their covers. You may notice, like, over the years.
Right.
And they're very, like
their Spiegel.
Yeah, it's something kind of like, there's something uniquely economisty about it, where they're like, almost like dystopian in a certain sense.
Well,
and
they're
I love the dystopian
the
thing.
oldest continuous
But you notice
British propaganda.
Yeah.
So they're good at it.
And you notice the wheat.
Like the 1700s.
You notice the wheat there. It's kind of like
Yeah, the skulls.
you look
Very
like-
clever. Uniquely British.
Yeah, it's almost like they have the finger on the pulse a bit more than others, or something like that.
Well, they set the tempo, so to speak, or they have the finger on the pulse of what the agenda is.
What the elites are,
Yeah, what's coming down from
From on
high
high.
finance capital, Speaking of finance capital, Elon Musk taking on the system. I know you covered it a bit when he first announced his takeover. Takeover is not complete yet. He's doubling down. He's becoming increasingly political, to the point where he's obviously getting some kind of signals, and he's tweeting that if I don't make it past the end of this year, it's been nice knowing you.
Yeah.
And also letting on that half of Biden's followers on Twitter are bots, because he's been doing an audit of Twitter, and he wants the price, to be dropped that he's going to pay for it, because he's thinking, based on his research, that as much as 20% of people are fake. They're just bots.
Yeah. Well, you know what happens
It's
when
at least that.
You know what happens when someone like him becomes. So I'll throw that up, Scotty, as a final comment. You know what happens when someone like him becomes political in the wrong direction, right?
Well, they get sexual harassment lawsuits. Bingo! SpaceX flight attendant said Elon Musk exposed himself and propositioned her for sex. Documents show. Yeah, he's got something in mind. Taking over Twitter, like I liken it to Trump's takeover of the Republican Party.
Would you take $250,000 for having to look at Elon Musk's wiener? Would you, Scotty?
No.
Not from a distance, like. If he said that you have to go into this room and Elon Musk is going to drop his pants and say, hey, you want to get it on? And you just go, nah. And then walk out and they give you $250,000. I'd do it, like. I mean, it doesn't seem like a bad, a bad payoff. Like.
No, yeah, it'd be worth it.
Anyway, I don't know if he did it or not, but it's interesting that kind of stuff. Me Too comes out whenever...
It's probably not true, though, because the same thing was said about Trump with that porn actress. And that, he won the case or was thrown out, and that was all tied up with his lawyer, who was totally corrupt.
Yeah.
And then she ended up suing the lawyer who was defending her. It was unclear who made up the bullshit. Anyway, it was pure bullshit from top to bottom. But that brings up Hillary Clinton, because Russiagate's kind of under the spotlight back in the US media this week because of this trial against the lawyer who was a campaign lawyer for Hillary Clinton in 2016, Sussman. It's connected because Elon Musk is wading into it by tweeting out, that he's being cute, I think. Let's look at his tweet. Elon Musk, you can shout out to him, apparently, and if it's enough of a bombshell, he'll respond to you. So he responded to this tweet. So someone goes, hey, Elon Musk, I've reported this tweet as misleading disinformation. Just giving you a heads up. Scroll up first so we'll see what the tweet is. It's Hillary Clinton. It's still there. November 1st, 2016, in which she lays out her claim
about Trump's secret line of communication to Putin, which is, disinformation, proven disinformation and lies, manufactured by her effectively, and her friends.
Her campain, who then took it to the FBI, which has been exposed this week in the trial.
It's 5.5 years old. 5.5 years old. And it's still there. Yeah. And what did he say?
Now scroll down to Musk's response last week to it. You're absolutely correct. That tweet is a Clinton campaign hoax, and he draws attention to a current article about this.
For which the campaign lawyer is undergoing a criminal trial. Clinton lawyer lied to manipulate FBI over Trump. But nobody cares about that anymore. We cared about it at the time, and others did, and said this is all bullshit. A lot of people, believe the bullshit, and so we have a good track record of calling it bullshit as it happens. And you know what? It's not very hard. Once you know the form of the people that are propagating certain information. You know that they're basically inveterate liars and openly admit that they're inveterate liars. Like McFall just said, you know, that's the real world. That's how it works. Diplomats lie. Pompeo said in the CIA, the things we focused on was, what did he say? What was that quote?
We lied, we cheated, we stole.
We lied, we cheated, we stole. At West Point Academy, that's what we trained the recruits in doing: lie, cheating, and stealing. So, yeah, there's some resistance in a lot of people to believing it, even from the horse's mouth, apparently. But it's interesting, yeah. So when Musk takes on Clinton and people like that, and the people she represents, he quickly gets something dug up from his past, and that was there, obviously. But while he was a good boy, nobody knows about it.
They know everything about you. It's a matter of how they'll dispense it depending on your behavior.
Right.
Now, Musk must have some kind of sense for that going into this.
I hope so.
Trump probably did too. And as it turns out, Trump was really clean as far as they go. There were mafia ties, sure, in New York, in his property deals, 100%. But it's like he actually boasted about it during his RNC stump speeches when he was still a candidate. He's like, everybody on this panel, they all gave me money.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, that's how it works.
They're
It's
all
like,
together,
yeah, the wallpaper. It's part of the structure of everything around us. Of course there's corruption. That's how you got to do anything in this country.
Right.
So they can then dispense that out when you're... So how far will he go with it? Well, I think he's stuck his paw in a hornet's nest by mentioning Hillary.
Well, he mentioned also that he's putting together. He tweeted that he's putting together SpaceX. I think, oh no, Tesla is putting together a hardcore team of crack lawyers that will be taking cases, actively taking cases against people. So he's like, given kind of warning or fair notice that he's gonna. He knows like what you're saying in a certain sense, that he knows what he's getting into, and he's not going to sit back and take it, basically. So we'll see. I don't think he's any kind of a savior or whatever like that, but it's good to have people like that come along who at least show a bit of, in positions like that, who have a bit of a little bit of decency, basically.
And clout and reach.
And it stands out all the more. It might not be very much, but it stands out all the more in comparison to the rest who are in the negative as far as decency and morality goes, Yeah, especially the politicians. Well...
After all that, one final comment on Putin and global crises and Russia losing and all that nonsense. Time magazine goes and writes this, published this week. It's actually a short article. It's worth going through for a few seconds. Headline: Putin may be winning the information war outside of the US and Europe.
Yeah, scroll down. Is Vladimir Putin losing the information war with Ukraine? Well, it depends on who you ask. It's never easy to measure such things, but here are a few numbers. 141 countries in the UN voted to condemn Russia's aggression. The number of African, Middle Eastern and South American countries who have imposed sanctions on Russia is 0. But they're not part of the international community, so they don't matter. So basically what the article is saying is that they're in an echo chamber in the West where they're believing all their own bullshit, while Russia isn't really concerned about it, and Russia has the ears of the rest of the world, the majority of the world, and Russia's kind of straight up plain talking is gaining some traction with those countries, but not in the West, which is has been weaned on a diet of, or reared on a diet of bullshit. And
well, it goes on to acknowledge that we're in an echo chamber, and it's a very small one. It's amazing that they have the insight to realize that periodically, but otherwise they carry on as if it's the world. You know, if you go back to it for a second, they write part of the reason for this discrepancy in how the world sees Russia is that, quote, 2/3 of the world doesn't see what we see. That's due to the balkanization of the internet, which Russia is in part responsible for. Today, there are 3 internets. There's the American and Western internet, which we think of as the internet. There's the unfree internet in places like Russia, Turkey, and India, where content is restricted and policed. Oh, Jesus, I never knew that content was restricted and policed on the internet anywhere. And then there's the Chinese internet, which is censored and not free at all. That must be like a degree worse. The Chinese internet, used by 1 out of 5 of the world's users, is pro-Russian. In the unfree internet of Turkey and India and the rest, they get much of their information about the war from Russian state media. They're not seeing Zelensky's nightly invocations to democracy, an interesting turn of phrase. They're seeing images of noble Russian soldiers. 2 of the most popular hashtags on the Indian internet are, quote, hashtag I stand with Putin and I stand with Russia.
Again, they're not part of the international community, Neil, so they don't matter.
That's
India doesn't matter and China doesn't matter. Okay?
That paragraph fascinated me because it reminds me of the 19th century academic categorization of the world in American and British academia. They really did see the world in 3 categories. They were the civilized world, the barbaric world, and then the savage world. And it was a sliding scale, you know. So barbaric was like Eastern Europe, North Africa, East Asia, China, India. But savage was, you know, the complete heathens beyond that. Africa, maybe Latin America.
Of course.
But that became politically incorrect. And after World War One, they just changed the definition, and it became the first world, the second world, the third world. And then now it's more simply the developed or developing.
Right.
But that's still
But the
how they
attitude
see it.
hasn't
They
changed.
still see a sliding scale.
Yeah. The colonial racist attitude hasn't changed, and it's endemic
It's
in
an
the West.
egotistical worldview.
In
It's-
Western politics, I
yeah.
should say.
And there's the golden billion.
Yeah.
And then there's a kind of bunch of people around that who want to get in kind of thing, who are not bad at seeing it as we see it, but they're still somewhat unfree. It's the unfree internet.
Yeah.
And then there's just beyond the pale, where it's all completely policed and restricted and censored. you
But
know?
before that, you have the free internet, which is in America. And,
Right.
that's been written in the context of the Biden administration creating an
Disinformation
czar, who, you know, basically the federal government in the US policing information on the internet.
which is only formalizing what they've been doing behind the scenes for
Right.
the last 6 bleeding years,
Right.
censoring, throttling everyone.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, it's all bullshit, really, isn't it? And you gotta weed through the bullshit to find the nuggets of truth, which is what we do, or try to do here anyway. So you don't have to do as much of it, at least. Yeah. So I think we'll leave it there for this week, folks.
Well, I think maybe we should probably, I mean, the title of the show kind of starts
Monkeypox?
with monkeypox, so I
Yeah.
think maybe we should, because this is obviously something everyone's very concerned about.
Absolutely.
So I took the liberty of reading mainstream, non-mainstream sources, and I found this infographic, which I think summarizes our general position on
Yes.
the whole monkeypox
And the
thing.
truth about the monkeypox, I think. Yeah. That's absolutely it. I can see. You want to pitch that maybe to...
that's terrifying. Okay, lads, I'm
Pitch
out of
that-
here. I'm
that's
going
it.
into lockdown. Y'all can do what you want.
You wanna
Don't
pitch-
come near me, okay? I'm getting my mask.
Yeah. Pitch that to Fauci. Fauci will love that. Yeah. Definitely put him back up there again. I don't think I got frayed enough. Yeah, I'm getting it. Okay, I understand.
It's
I
the
understand.
eyes. Look at the terror, the
Yeah.
whites of terror in the eyes.
I understand.
And the bloodshot. He's been up like for 3 weeks. in
That's like the
lockdown.
toy, you know, like the toy monkey
Yeah.
that like has the symbols and
Yeah, yeah.
everything, and
Ah.
I was wondering if like Fauci might like buy a bunch and like
It
ship
actually-
them to every American or something.
Yeah, yeah. It actually
just
look-
as a reminder.
It looks a bit like Fauci, actually.
It does.
A cross between Fauci, Bill Gates, and George Bush. Oh my God, can you imagine? Anyway, yeah. So, yeah, we're gonna leave it there for this week, folks. Thanks for watching, for commenting, for whatever you were doing. Thanks for doing it. Don't forget to smash all the buttons, and we'll be back next week with another show, truthifying whatever needs to be truthified. So until then, have a good day, evening, morning, whatever it is with you. See you later.
Till next week. Bye.
Can't stop the signal now.